Today, we're joined by Albert DaCosta, the founder and former CEO of Paragon 28, who just 4 months ago completed one of the most impressive exits in recent orthopedic history. In April of 2025, Albert sold his specialized foot and ankle surgery company to orthopedic giant Zimmer Biomet for a deal worth $1.2 billion. Not bad for a company that started with two founders pooling their life savings and flying to Germany with a dream. So today, welcome, Albert. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Drew. Great to be here.
Well, so it's kind of big news. Everybody's heard the headline, but let's talk about the journey. I'd love to have you share with the many entrepreneurs and innovators that watch this show. I'd love for you to kind of give us a little bit of a history on who you are, what inspired you along the way, and then we'll dig into some more details as well.
All right, sounds great. Uh, I'll start off maybe by telling you that in my childhood, I dreamt of many things. Starting a business, becoming a CEO, going public, exiting a business, that was never in my thoughts. Right. If I think back early enough, I'm one of four siblings. I was raised in a very old fashioned Portuguese household. Um, my father did really such an old traditional story where he grew up very poor in Portugal. He worked his way into the arms of Texaco and and helped fund the immigration of his brothers and sisters. And so I was brought up, if you can imagine, in that very fiscally conservative mindset. But some of the traditional business values that were instilled in me that I didn't realize were happening when they were happening certainly did manifest later in life. Right. So then if I fast forward and maybe one more point to note there is one of my siblings, I'm the youngest of four. I have two sisters in the middle and an older brother. My next sister in line was born with spina bifida.
Hmm.
Right. And so I was raised with such a deep awareness of what it's like to be living with a disability, right? And the motivation to not stand out. You know, you go to a shopping mall, you don't want people staring at you, and so that culturally, I think, resonates in me, and it certainly was a big part of my upbringing.
Hmm.
Fast forward, I went to the most prestigious university in all of the world, the University of Florida. And I'll tell you, and I say that as a joke to some of the people that know me. I'm a big fan of the Florida Gators, as you can see behind me. But one of the things that I wanted to do there, I wanted to do technical sales, but I wanted to diversify myself from your traditional salesperson that originates in the marketing realm and kind of works their way into sales. And so I studied chemical engineering, and to
Huh.
this day, it's just an absolute sequence of accidents and
Hmm.
and blessings, right? But I graduated with a chemical engineering degree, a minor in business, and an emphasis in technical sales. Was my
Hmm.
degree. All right.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, and so from there, I immediately I didn't quite get the technical sales job right out of college. Most of the companies were looking for people to have rooted knowledge in their technology, and so I actually started as a process improvement engineer in Pendleton, South Carolina, working for a company called Milliken,
Huh.
and it was awesome. Great experience. That company is amazing. Some of the best education I received. 6 weeks of training as a new employee there, and I got to work with every aspect of that warehouse type manufacturing facility. And so um in God, what was this, about 1999, 2000, the company, I had received so many wonderful acknowledgments for the work I was doing there. And I had already migrated into technical sales. I was selling a nucleating agent for polypropylene. It's a little it's for plastics. It's a byproduct of the oil industry. And the company was offering to move me to Singapore.
Hmm.
And I wasn't yet married to my now wife, but we were dating. And I remember calling her father and just letting him know the good news that they were looking at that. And I'll tell you immediately, he started talking to me about the beauty of medical device sales. Right? He wanted me not to take his daughter
Hard
to
pass on
Singapore. Yeah.
Singapore, yeah.
He wasn't quite as excited about the opportunity as I was hoping he would be, and he started talking to me. He's an internal medicine doctor by trade. He's also a chemical engineering background, which is interesting. But and he started explaining that this pathway of med device sales, you're standing in the operating room, you're supporting surgery. It was just an exhilarating thought, right?
Hmm.
Um, and in my life, I had always wanted to be a doctor. I just didn't think I could stand the sight of blood.
Hmm.
All right. And so from that moment in time, now we're talking about like, 2001 maybe ish. Um, from that point in time, I went on monster.com, which was the recruiting platform at the time. And
Mhm.
I just looked up anything with medical. I didn't know the difference between med device or pharmaceutical sales, or I just knew I needed to be in something medical. Um, he again
And
communicated
in
how
the US,
much
right? And in the
i-
US.
in the
Yeah,
US
yeah,
and preferably close to Miami, where I was born and raised, and my
yeah.
wife is from as well. And so that started my journey. I quickly got an interview, and I got an opportunity to actually go observe a surgery just to make sure I could tolerate the sight of blood.
And how did you
And I
do?
got I did okay. I wouldn't say I did great, but I kept my composure somewhat. It was a rotator cuff surgery. I actually remember observing that case in North Carolina, and looking in to the incision and just seeing the marvel, and being present in the operating room is an experience that never gets old. It's
Yeah,
such a privilege.
yeah.
And there's someone who's so vulnerable on a table, and they're hoping that every single person involved in that surgery is as equipped and knowledgeable, and it just inspired me. I fell in love with it on the spot. And so that started my journey into med device. From there, I got a job with a company called Linvatec,
Mhm,
which today is ConMed,
mhm.
another amazing training program. And I started selling everything from general surgery. They had some smaller orthopedic type implants, capital equipment, towers, and then arthroscopy gear. And it was it was just a rocket ship from there.
Yeah, that was actually, when I was at Zimmer, we
Mm.
sold products that
Paul.
then became became Hall
Yep.
Limbitech, and then yeah,
That's right. Yeah.
that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. And they had a training program in Largo, Florida that was really, really good.
Huh,
Just the pre-training material got you so ready for the training that I left there just feeling incredibly equipped, knowledgeable, just excited. Yeah.
that's great. So that was your
Yeah.
first medical device sales job.
That
So,
was.
um, where did that lead you? At what point did you sort of make a transition? And not you don't need to jump all the way to Paragon, but
Yeah.
walk us through your journey and how because a lot of people are wondering, about their career path
Mhm.
and the decisions that people make relative to that next move are really they carry pretty significant potential consequences. So walk us through
Mhm.
the decisions that you made to where your next move went.
Yeah. Well, skipping some of the gory details there, but my time at Linvatec was short-lived. I had a distributor who had a very different philosophy, didn't maybe carry some of those traditional business values that my father had instilled on me, and so I was there for about 8 or 9 months, but I did get some really good general experience. And then from there, I actually got recruited to carry Wright Medical from another distributor, this guy named Perry Proctor. Brilliant, brilliant guy, just an amazing person. And we connected right away. The interview was powerful. And he, as an independent distributor, he had Wright Medical and he had Orthofix. And so I immediately jumped into what I thought was a hip and knee opportunity. All right.
Mhm.
And started in Miami. Miami's presence was almost non existent at the time. And I started calling on hip and knee docs and meeting some great people and having some great conversations. But I realized really, really quickly that the hip and knee world is very, very personalized, right? The equipment matters so much. The instruments and the techniques for putting these implants in matter in many ways more than the implant, right? And when a surgeon gets knowledgeable and comfortable with the system, it's very hard for them to switch. And I remember feeling some of that frustration, thinking, here I am having these great dialogues, conversations, and they're leading to no cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about the selling cycle for that, one, they want to make sure you're going to be there. They
Yep.
want to make sure that you're not, every 6 months transitioning. So that longevity, I didn't have that yet.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Two, there's that comfort factor. So it tends to take somewhere around 2 years to really start making progress in the hip and knee world. And I remember just I'm super ADHD, right? Um, I get excited when there's a food that I fall in love with. I eat it till I'm absolutely sick and tired of it. It's just like everyday sushi. So it's um, and so I was feeling this stagnation, and it was right in the beginning, and I was so excited to be there. And so at the time, Wright Medical had a distribution agreement with a small company out of France called New Deal.
Mm-hmm.
And they had maybe 8 to 10 products for foot and ankle surgery, like an MTP plate, a headless screw, a couple of other widgets in that portfolio. Subtalar arthroresis, I think, was one of them. And so Miami is also a very, very strong foot and ankle community. Barry University's there. So there were 9 podiatry residency programs in Miami proper. And at the time, there was only two foot and ankle specialist MDs.
Mm.
But I remember thinking, well, let me give this a shot. And the reception was amazing. Right? The culture of the foot and ankle surgeon is really, really distinct. Um, and I remember just having invigorating conversations, common sense type discussions, right? If they look at a product and it makes sense to them and it feels good in their hands, they don't need to see 10-year follow-up data,
Mm-hmm.
and I loved that. I want 10-year follow-up data, but
Yeah. Right.
in the absence of that, I just really enjoyed that common sense thinking, like, "This makes sense. I'll try it tomorrow."
Yeah. Now, was that was
And
Albert? Was
yeah.
that when I mean, I know that the podiatrists were very willing to take on, try new things.
Mhm.
But was that also kind of when it was just the foot and ankle market wasn't it was very nascent at that
Yeah,
stage?
completely. I would say completely ignored. And the way I describe it today is it's still one of the youngest segment of orthopedics, right? Um, just to give you a parallel, I remember discussions around the posterior slope when putting in a total knee replacement and how much research guided
Mhm.
4 degrees is like the perfect slope that gives you a beautiful flexion extension profile. And here we are in foot and ankle, and we have 30-40% complication rates,
Mm,
no clear definitions. We're doing the best we can with what we have, but we don't have much.
mm,
There's not 10-year follow-up data. And if you know the origins of the foot and ankle market, we were borrowing technology from somewhere else, right?
mm,
It was mostly considered trauma, which
mhm,
is not an accurate statement. That's about 30% of our market. And so we were borrowing plates and screws from hip fractures and other parts of the body, and you can feel your foot.
yeah,
Even with a BMI like mine, I've got a heavier BMI. You can feel every nook and cranny in your foot.
mhm,
So imagine using a intertroch plating system, or some of these trauma plates that at the time were really thick stainless steel plates, and
mhm,
imagine putting that in your lower extremity. There's nothing that can really tolerate that. So it leads to all kinds of complications, tissue irritation. It's such a mismatch with the strength of the bones and the distribution of forces in your foot. So all that to say, if you think of the origin of foot and ankle, it was so crippled with no clear definitions. And at the time, the podiatry community was really not where it is today. 1 year fellowships were common. Fellowships at all, actually. 1 year residency programs directly in foot and ankle were common. And so it's evolved so much, and the scope of practice for every state is different. And so I just remember meeting these doctors, feeling the culture of foot and ankle, and I remember thinking about those limitations and thinking, here's a chance for us not to sell things. Here's a chance for us to be a market,
Mm.
right? What Synthes was to AO back in the day, and to think that every surgeon in orthopedics trains on those principles
Hmm.
is such a cool legacy, right?
For sure.
And so at the time, I was a rep for about 2.5 years in Miami. Jim Rogers, who started the medical sales college, was a regional VP of sales for the Southeast. And he's seeing all of a sudden this guy in Miami selling a ton of foot and ankle stuff, and just flew down to figure out what's going on. And
Mm.
I remember so vividly having that conversation with him and saying, the company is really working hard to be a hip and knee presence, and they've got really good technology. But the chances of them leapfrogging the next, I think at the time they were like the sixth largest hip and knee company. And I said, here's Greenfield. Here's a chance to be the first company to really focus on this beautiful space and make a difference. And from that conversation, I know he went back and had a lot of conversations with Enright Medical, but they agreed with that philosophy, and they got excited somewhat. They just were not totally sure what foot and ankle meant and how it was different from hips and knees. But that started my transition from a sales rep into corporate America, and then ultimately influencing to some extent the foot and ankle program there.
Well, what's so fascinating about that is at that time, Wright Medical was a major total joint company. And then
Mm,
you saw Wright Medical make a complete shift into foot and ankle where they
mm,
divested their hip and knee business.
yeah.
Now Microport, which is having plenty of challenges right now
Mm,
with everything, supply
sure.
chain and so forth. Um, so it's fascinating to see a company go from a dominant joint company dabbling in selling other foot and ankle products to what it became, which was ultimately sold to Stryker for billions of dollars. It's a
Yeah.
fascinating journey. So you were
Yeah.
there for that, for much of that.
I, I was for a lot of it. Yeah. And 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 I'll tell you, it was a really exciting time at Wright Medical. Um, we were discovering things like, it's like every day was like kind of opening a gift, and one thing that I'll tell you about the foot and ankle market outside of just being underserved is that it's really dynamic. There's over 100 indications to address.
Huh.
So again, if you go back to my ADD and ADHD or whatever it is, um, every day feels different, right? I get to one day you're dealing with Charcot reconstruction, which is typically a severe diabetic neuropathic condition of the lower extremity. These patients are slated to get amputations. And so you're now trying to salvage someone's limb because you know the consequences of that could be pretty devastating to the patient. And then on another side, you're dealing with millimeters of precision with the bunion, where a patient really expects to wear flip flops and they want their foot to look beautiful from a cosmetic standpoint. So it's just such a dynamic and a dichotomy of considerations for us. And so that makes every day exciting to be here.
Yeah, that's really true. So Wright Medical,
Mhm.
you had a nice run there. And then
Yep.
what transition led you away from Wright Medical?
Yeah. And so again, I'll highlight that there were some really good times and some great people there. There was a point in time where I felt like the company was trying to fit foot and ankle into the idea of a hip and knee company, right? And um, I've I've always been really aware that every segment of orthopedics has its own personality, right?
Yeah.
I get flustered sometimes when people lump foot and ankle into an extremities bucket. All right.
Mhm.
the upper extremity surgeon culturally is really distinct from a lower extremity surgeon, right? A spine, yeah,
how would you describe that? Because that's really an
yeah,
interesting statement, and I think you're right. Even
yeah,
sports med is different than the recon, different than the spine in general.
yeah,
So give
completely.
us a description of how you view them as different than the upper extremity
Yeah.
market.
I remember meeting upper extremity docs because again, I had pretty darn near a full portfolio. I wasn't carrying spine yet at the time, but I remember calling on upper extremity doctors and them asking me questions that I could just tell they knew the answers to. Right?
Mm,
They were just testing to see if I knew the answers to that.
right.
Um, the fact that they deal with very small vessels and tiny, they wear specs. There's this very academic surgeon. They're very, very not, and I don't mean that to sound like the foot and ankle doctor is a barbarian, but that's not my suggestion at all. But their expectation of a rep in the operating room is far less the clinician type. It's more like you just make sure the stuff is there, and I got my stuff right. And
Mhm,
where the foot and ankle surgeon's inviting you into the discussion. A foot and ankle surgeon in the operating room, they want to know what people are doing in, across town. They also want to know what people are doing in Kansas, and they want to know what people are doing in China to treat these conditions. And that's the conversation is just so different,
mm,
and we learn from each other. They want us to support these cases more than just opening a box,
mhm.
and I loved that. And you're right, the sports medicine doc is another very different culture, and um, hip and knee doctors are very. I always say that if I had a lineup of 10 surgeons, I could probably tell you which is which,
Just by
and
looking at them.
maybe I would need a word or two to come out of their mouth, but I can usually pick them out of a lineup.
Mhm.
Um, But that part of it, one thing that we built Paragon on, and I don't mean to jump into that, but one thing that was important to us is when we talk about the focus, I was a pretty good sales rep. I'll credit myself there, but I was much less effective matching the culture of the upper extremity.
Mhm.
Right. I was really good matching the culture of the lower extremity. And I've seen that through the years. One of my roles at Wright Medical was building the direct sales force. I was a technical specialist when I first went into the corporate environment. And I remember that first year with Jim Rogers, we interviewed over 1,500 people in 1 year, and we hired around the first 150 direct salespeople.
Mhm.
And my role was to jumpstart these salespeople in a territory. So I'd work with them, get going, familiarize with hospital systems. And I mean, a lot of these people were brand new and I started seeing trends. And I realized pretty quickly that people that were really effective at upper extremities might be less effective at lower extremities and vice versa.
Hmm.
Right. And so when we started Paragon, we said, let's not get distracted. Let's really try to be as efficient as we can. We know we match the culture here. Let's dig in. Let's
Mm.
commit to this and do something great.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So Red Medical runs its course.
Yep.
What was next for you?
Yeah, so that again, that frustration that they kept trying to match what they knew as a hip and knee company, and in some situations it was very different, right? And so that kind of that plus a couple of other things led to my departure around 2009, right? And at that point in time, Jim Rogers had started the medical sales college, and so I connected with a spine company and we constructed a situation where I became a distributor. I actually had 11 states
Hmm.
for the spine company, and coincidentally, I picked up about 2.5 states as a distributor for sports medicine, the Biomet sports medicine line.
Mhm.
Um, and so my goal there was building a big, almost nationwide distributorship, and to see if I could translate some of the successes in sales building these clinician style salespeople into success as a distributor. And and that was short lived from the perspective that I didn't love spine as much as I loved foot and ankle.
Hmm.
Um, I didn't feel like the best technology could win there. Um, I didn't enjoy being in 4 to 8 hour cases where you're not really participating. You're standing in the operating room and the dialogue was less. I just didn't connect as well with that spine world. The sports medicine world is fun, very competitive. A entry level company really struggles against some of the giants like Arthrex. And then I found myself reverting back to conversations around foot and ankle, right? In the spine space at the time, amniotic tissues were starting to evolve for um, preventing adhesions and the closure of the spine. And so I started looking at this amniotic tissue and thinking this would be amazing for sesamoid adhesions and bunion
Hmm.
surgery in the foot. And so
Mhm.
I actually started going out and talking to foot and ankle surgeons again with this amniotic tissue, and that reminded me what I missed and what I
Hmm.
loved. So when I left Wright Medical, my intention was not to start Paragon 28. My intention was to look at some of these other areas of orthopedics and see if I could be impactful there.
Hmm.
And then my heart guided me back. Yep.
Yeah, so I've was reading something about your journey before we got on this call, and it was fascinating because you referenced that it wasn't that you had some brilliant IP that
Mhm.
you were excited about that was the genesis of Paragon 28, but it was more led from a place of just frustration. So can you walk us through that?
Yeah. Yeah. So and that's a perfect spot for that question, right? Because that when I left Wright, and I was looking at other things, I did get a lot of phone calls from other big companies who were looking at the foot and ankle space and looking at the growth rates and thinking, wow, we want a piece of that. Right. So I'm having these conversations with some big companies out there, and I'm realizing really quickly that the sincerity was not there. You
Mm,
know, and I started thinking back to walking the trade floor at a double AOS or an AOFAS, before my departure, right medical. And I remember I was obsessed with the kits and the solutions and the development of technology. I remember as a sales rep sitting there with a kit on my lap the night before surgery and just going through every piece and figuring out how I could streamline these, how I could create some tips and tricks to make these cases go really effectively. And so I was really passionate about that. But there were some things that I realized didn't connect with me from an innovation piece, like the porosity of a titanium bone wedge or something like that. And so then I remember walking the floor of a trade show and seeing replications of the same mistakes all over the
mm,
place. Like they would pop up in every company, and you'd see very silly things that were called innovation. It's
mm,
essentially this system's a 2.7 screw, well, ours is a 2.8, and that
mhm.
1.1 millimeter makes a world of difference, and
Right,
maybe the anodization color is different, or we have a
right.
different bevel here. And I thought, man, this is crazy. Everyone wants in this space, but no one really wants to be the company that's investing in research and creating better definitions like those AO principles.
Mm,
Forget the implant. If you understand the real limitations of a procedure, any segment of orthopedics, the implant makes it just pops out, right? Like the fifth child,
mm,
But if you don't, and you're just like, we need a procedure to be part of this bag in this space, everything's laborious. And then what you do is you just look at your competitors, you figure out what they have, what is their IP, and how can I get around it.
mhm,
And that's so not exciting to me.
mm.
And I don't think that's my engineering mind. It's just me. I don't want that to be the legacy, is that I have Me Too stuff. Yeah,
Right,
he started a Me Too company too.
right.
So my frustration having those conversations with big companies and realizing these people don't care about foot and ankle, they just want the growth. Looking at the trade show floors and seeing that what people were calling innovation was just nonsense.
Yeah.
All those things led to me thinking, um, we could do this better. we should do this better, right? I felt like I was the only person in a sea of tons of people that had sincerity in this space,
Mm.
and you can't
And
fake sincerity.
and it sounds like, beyond sincerity, you had a curiosity and really an interest in solving problems that nobody else was really addressing.
Yeah. Well, going back again to being a salesperson, and one of the things that I tell people even today, and when we were public, a year ago, I used to tell Wall Street, I'm not sure they cared as much about it, but what makes us different is we carried the bag, right?
Mhm.
And not only did we carry the bag, we were good carrying the bag, meaning we standing in the operating room is not a paycheck. It's an
Right.
honor, right? And so when I'm standing in that operating room and I'm a wannabe surgeon, I wish I was younger so I could be a surgeon today. I'm not. So the next best thing is how do I support surgeons the best I can? And I remember watching every movement when a surgeon's putting a drill and it just kind of glides into the bone real easily. I'm already thinking, okay, the bone quality is not great.
Mhm.
When I'm watching a surgeon tightening a screw and I'm looking at the amount of force that they use, I'm building in my head an algorithm of options to support
Uh-huh.
that case, right?
Uh-huh.
What's going to happen if this doesn't work as indicated because we have this?
Yeah.
And I'd be asking surgeons questions about, does this patient a smoker? And I'd be thinking about biologic stimulus. And so that passion,
Yeah.
that sincerity, when you're standing in the operating room and you take the honor of supporting that case, um, you really care about innovation, right?
Yeah.
And the
Like,
things that don't matter matter. Yep.
that is such a salient point. As a guy who carried the bag in the OR for Zimmer for
Mm.
10 years, I can tell you that, to your point, you can see the purchase. You can see if that
Yeah.
screwdriver is just spinning
Mhm.
when the screw head seats, or if
Yeah.
it's purchasing and they have to really bear down.
Yeah.
And, um, I know there's some companies that really want their engineers to get in the OR so they can see the products being used, but when you're in there day after day after day seeing complex cases, you do bring a level of perspective and insight and
Mhm.
expertise that frankly really is just, I think, a real advantage.
Yeah. That's exactly right. And you're hitting on one of our earliest pieces was an engineer standing in surgery and observing that surgery to understand, okay, we're doing an ankle fusion is not the same because the pressure is still on the salesperson, right?
Mhm.
So if things aren't going right, it's the salesperson that's clenching up and sweating bullets. The engineers sometimes is talking about football. How did the Gators do this weekend?
Right.
Um, I can't get an engineer into 5 or 10 cases even and give them that understanding of that tension that happens to the salesperson when a case doesn't go beautifully, I would lose sleep for 2 nights in a row. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh, what could I have done differently?
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to impart that passion.
There's really something unique about that rep surgeon relationship that
Mm.
the right good reps, and we'll just, say that most of them are really great. They really want to make the surgeon look good. They want the surgeon to be happy. They want the case to go perfectly, and they want the patient to have a phenomenal outcome. And so, to your point, anybody else who doesn't have that relationship lacks that connectivity to the outcome that really is uniquely that of the reps.
That's right. No, that's exactly right. And I'll tell you, there's a few pieces to that, but the old days of a sales rep in med device was all relationship.
Mhm.
Hey doc, you're the medical professional. I'm a former athlete. I'm here to bring my stuff and make sure it's there in working order. I'm not going to tell you anything you don't know about doing the surgery. Those days are gone. The clinician is the expectation today. That surgeon expects you to know everything that makes them uncomfortable, what makes that case tick, what could go wrong. We call it options for options for options, right? Backups for backups for backups. If this doesn't work perfectly, you should be ready with 2 or 3 backups for me. I
Anticipate.
ex
Yeah.
anticipating that, and I want you paying attention to every piece of that case. I don't wanna have to tell you as a sales rep standing there, I really expect you to know when it's time to bring this forward and bring that forward, and we built our company on that. And companies, misconstrue the importance of the implant. The implant is one important piece of innovation. The real innovation is actually the instrumentation to support that and the optionality that goes with that, right?
Mm.
It's the system that makes the difference. And I'll tell you, when I show new products to surgeons, 9 out of 10 of them remember the instruments,
Mhm.
right? But it's the instruments that companies look at and say, "Do we need to put this really expensive retractor in this kit?" You know, and
Mhm.
the sales rep will tell you, "Hell yeah, you do. And if I need it 1 in 20 cases, it's worth having it there, right? I
Yeah,
made a difference when I needed it."
exactly.
And that's the energy of Paragon 28. So,
Yeah. What a uh, it's kind of a secret weapon to be able to have a CEO who really understands that, because
yeah.
I would say most of the CEOs in the orthopedic industry never carried a bag.
Mhm,
Um, Many, probably most, came up through a marketing side.
mhm,
Some
yep,
cases through finance, which, you know, cringe a little bit, but it had to really lead to at Paragon. We haven't really talked about the origin of Paragon, but
mhm,
it had to really create trust and what I would imagine to be a very unique culture from top down.
mhm, yep. Well, I'll tell you, it's I credit that to the litmus test, right? Now we're going into maybe the part that makes you realize that, okay, I can be a founder, business owner, right? Again, that wasn't my aspiration. But I remember going from a sales rep wearing scrubs every day to a corporate technical specialist. That was my first role in the corporate world. And I remember now I'm wearing a suit, right? And the minute you're wearing a suit, people expect you to have answers to things that yesterday you didn't know, right? And it is okay you didn't know it yesterday, but today you should know it. And I'm not suggesting that you just start answering questions you don't know the answers to, but I remember thinking, okay, how do I answer? How do I think about questions that I've never thought about answering, right?
Hmm.
Um, and I realized really early on that my litmus, this works for me and maybe doesn't work for other people, but I put myself in the receiving end of every decision.
Hmm.
And if I would feel good about that, it's probably a decision that's worth considering. If I wouldn't feel great about that being done to me, then it's probably not something that I need to go back to the drawing board, right? And that litmus test, I gotta tell you, is as real that day that I became a technical specialist as it is today. And what that means for me is am I breaking the code of making the right decisions, right? You're gonna make some errors. It's no doubt. But can I beat the odds like a casino, right? The house has a 55% chance.
Mhm.
And if I close my eyes and I guess, I've got a 50-50 shot. But if I put that litmus in front of me, now I might cheat to 85, 90%, right? And that's what it's all about. And when you do that, you're cheating the odds, but more importantly, you're creating a culture that you care about people.
Mhm.
And that was a byproduct of having the right litmus for me.
Yeah.
So the company, we feel like we care about each other because we care about every decision we make. It's not just like, hey, am I going to hit my bonus? It's like, is it going to help my team? Is it going to help this patient? Is it going to help this surgeon? And you can't, again, you can't force a culture. I can't just say the words and hope that becomes our culture. Culture is what you make and
Yeah.
how you act and the decisions you make. And that's I remember that point in my career. I actually started a company as a sales rep doing lithotripsy, and and it took off.
Mm.
And I remember then thinking, not bad at making good decisions, Um, and if the decisions come from a real sincere place, you're beating the odds. And I remember that business ultimately failed because the market for lithotripsy dropped out. It just disappeared. But as a company, I was thriving. Like we built a team of people, and I remember that success early on going, this was never a thought for me. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, okay, I've got a knack for this.
Hmm.
And so that was an impression on me.
Hey everyone, TJ Halverson here. Did you know that a mediocre hire can cost your MSK company over $1 million? While other recruiters coach candidates to say what you want to hear, we find leaders that actually deliver. The DeAngelis Group has over 25 years of transparent executive search. So de-risk your next hire by contacting us at orthospinesearch.com.
Well, culture reflects leadership. It doesn't matter what paint on the walls. It's
Mhm.
it's what comes down and emanates from the top that is replicated. So really, really cool. So let's get to the start
Yeah.
of Paragon 28. Obviously, there's the name wasn't random. So
Yeah.
maybe talk to us a little bit about that first, and then talk about the origin of the company.
You got it. Yeah. So during that period where I was in spine and sports medicine, there was a gentleman that I had worked with at Wright Medical. He was a distributor in Birmingham, Alabama. His name's Lee Rosenthal. Um, Tight connection between Jim Rogers, Lee Rosenthal, and myself as a technical specialist. I was covering his distributorship in Birmingham. So we had met and so during that 1 year where I was picking up spine and I had the sports medicine lines, he was doing something similar. So he started picking up a couple of distribution lines and we were working, talking together and sharing ideas about building these distributorships. And through that, we started talking about how it was a good opportunity, but our hearts weren't there, right? Um, we wanted that thrill of being more than just a person that cashes a check. I don't want to just make money. I know that sounds so cheesy, but I really want to leave a mark on this world. And 30 years from now, what are people going to remember about you? Well, you were a great sales rep and you sold a lot of product. No, you know. And so I just remember having these conversations with Lee and thinking, um, our hearts are foot and ankle, and our bodies right now are in this world that's not natural to us. And so we started talking about should we go back, and if we did, what does it look like? And I remember we had some disagreements about what the idea would mean, but collectively, I was thinking he's a good yin for my yang. He's not as obsessed with procedural knowledge and tech as I am. And he is a very organized person. And logistically, he's just geared that way. And so I thought we're a good match, right? And he agreed. And so that was the idea is like, should we start this and and start a company in this space and do something really, really powerful? And so that was the origin of how we are going to do that, like that we were going to do it. And then we just started mapping it out. Okay, we don't want to exit, right? There was two companies in the very beginning that I remember from the outside looking in thinking that's impressive, right? One of them was Synthes, which I already mentioned. That that Synthes connection to AO principles, I wanted something like that, right? And when AO principles were established, they didn't have the tools that we have today. And so I remember thinking, let's be the company that actually does research, not to prove how cool my widgets are, but do research to better understand these indications. And if we do that from an unbiased seat, will ideas pop out, right? The ideas will be effortless. And so that was one philosophy. We wanted to emulate that, not Synthes, but that connection to AO. And then the second one was Arthrex. I remember looking at Arthrex. They launched a lot of product every year. A lot of the product that they launched was a new way to think about old procedures. And I loved that, right? Think about the tightrope, the flexible fixation for syndesmotic repair. And the first time I saw that, I was like, oh, makes so much sense. This is such a dynamic market. And they're private. And I remember being at Wright Medical, and I remember the influence of investors calling you up and saying, hey, a new market report just came out.
Huh.
We encourage you to shift gears and start looking at volar plating. That's going to be the next big boom. And we're like, well, what about this foot thing we're working on? They're like, yeah, pause that, go over here. And I remember feeling like the influence from a desk looking at a market report wasn't living your market, right? Standing in the operating room tells you way more than a market report does, right? So I'm looking at Arthrex. I'm looking at how innovative they were, their successes in sports medicine, their focus early on, laser sharp focused in on sports medicine. To this day, that focus is so powerful. Every big company in the world is trying to emulate that, and they can't penetrate the loyalty that exists still to the sports side of Arthrex. Private company, put every dollar he had where he thought it should be. Those are all things that we thought that's the second company we want to emulate.
Hmm.
So the origin of Paragon 28 was, let's build Arthrex / Synthes with a caveat. The caveat is Arthrex wants to be a little bit more like Stryker today, and Stryker wants to be a little bit more like J&J. And so let's take that first part of Arthrex, that focused sports medicine piece. We've got hundreds of indications to think about in foot and ankle. We're going to be busy for the next 30, 40 years. Let's create a company that is dead set focused on foot and ankle and nothing but foot and ankle. And let's build the principles that are going to define the future of this space. And that will be the legacy we leave. And that was the thought that carried us, right? And one more piece that I think is worth mentioning here, Drew, and I'll let you ask the next question, but I had seen, one of the roles at when I was at Wright is I was analyzing new technology. So some smaller companies were emerging with, bells and whistles, and we'd take a look at them. And I remember seeing companies with a cool widget, and those companies would struggle to build a sales presence because it was one widget, right? And now I'm going out to independent contractors and I'm fighting for mind share, right? I've got this cool product and this distributor carries 6 lines. And I ask you to carry this one widget and I get 1/50th of your mind share, right? And so it's just so hard for a company to build their presence in a field with one widget, and then you start building a second and a third. So I remember Lee and I talking about that and saying, how do we want to approach this? Because we don't think that's effective. And so we thought, okay, plates and screws, maybe naively, we thought that's a little bit more of the commodity piece of our space. At this point in time, by the way, I already had some napkin sketches that we started designing late 2009, right? So I had these napkin sketches for things like Lapidus wedges, Lapidus cut guides. I had some precision guiding stuff, but we remember saying, well, how are we going to do this? Well, let's partner with somebody who has those products, Normed, right? And then we can build a sales force around an existing platform while we infuse technology that we design and innovate. And we walked the floor because we didn't know it was going to be Normed at first, but we walked AAOS with our wheelie bags and people made fun of us on Cafe Pharma, but we met all these companies and Normed stood out. We were completely transparent. We said, hey, we've got ideas. We want to build a company. We want to partner on these products. And the Normed at the time was 20-year-old foot and ankle technology. So they had an existing platform of plates and screws. They loved our ideas, some of those napkin sketches. The deal was, hey, we'll give you exclusive rights in the United States and the Americas. We want first right of refusal on your ideas, right? And it was beautiful. Handshake, right? And and we got this beautiful German culture around building a business, which was it reminded me a lot of my dad's traditional business values, you know.
Mhm.
That handshake meant a lot. And that's us, you know. This is a small world, big community, small world, but we really cherish that. And when we started the company, I remember thinking with Lee, we want to build something that we can look back in 10 years and celebrate with each other, with us, right? With people who get as excited about doing something cool. And we want to look back at what we did and be proud.
So are you saying that you entered into a business relationship with the company on a handshake? Or did
Yeah,
you
completely.
how long did that handshake stand, and was it ever challenged?
Yeah. Yeah. So it was challenged a lot. I remember because Normed was in Tuttlingen, Germany, which in the med device community, Tuttlingen, Germany is very similar to Warsaw, Indiana here in the
Mhm.
United States. It's like the mecca of med device in Europe. And so I remember Lee and I, which excuse me, at the time we had life savings, right? That was it. Um and so we flew out there to sit down with Uwe Peck, was one of the founders of Normed. We sat down in this little facility in Tuttlingen, Germany, and he told us at the time something that really stuck to us, right? He said, it's really not cool for a German company to sell, all right? Because you take so much pride employing local people in your community.
Right.
You're cherished as a hero in these communities. These are villages, really romantic, quaint villages. I could still picture Tuttlingen in Germany as I'm having this conversation, and just it's such a beautiful community around that device, and the history and tradition that goes through there, and those values really matter. And so that stuck with us, right? And a few years into our relationship, this started in 2010, late 2010 is when we established the company. We stood it up and we said, okay, we're gonna do this, right? So we're now talking August of 2010 is like when we incorporated the name. It was an LLC first, you know, but
Mhm.
um, and so we flew out to Tuttlingen, Germany. We're sitting with Uwe Peck. He's telling us this, and we're thinking, great handshake, loyal people, got great portfolio. We've got access to engineering and manufacturing. This could be great. And shortly after that, we started seeing almost immediate success in the United States. Man, I was covering cases, Lee was covering cases. The thought was, we're going to buy a set, we're going to start selling product from this set, and the dollars that we generate are going to go right into R&D, right? So now we're going to start designing the next opportunity. And we realized pretty quickly that every dollar you make goes back into buying another set so
Right.
that you could sell two sets, right?
Right.
And then you make $2, and now $2 go to buy four sets, you know? And so we're thinking, holy crap, we misjudged this, you know? I
Mm.
was thinking 20% is your COGS, you know?
Right.
And so that was a kind of a revelation to us. We're thinking, when are we going to have enough money to start putting really funneling into R&D? And at this point in time, I'm telling you, I would stay up till 2 in the morning because I was communicating with people in Germany, and it's the next day there, and I would all day be thinking about all these things about building this company. And I remember at the very beginning, I started writing down, where are the biggest needs in our space? After standing in surgeries for years, hundreds, if not thousands of surgeries, as a person really, really cares about this stuff and observing all these areas we just didn't have the right solution, I started writing them down. And I had about 73 projects that I wrote down day one. Right.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. And that's, again, that's the foot and ankle space today. And I'm fast forwarding, I'm going to jump back and forth on the chronology here, but today we have well over 80 product families that we've introduced to the market. And when I do that exercise, there's still over 60 something areas that we need to address, right?
Wow.
Yeah. And so I'm looking at this list of all these things we have to do, and the ideas are just resonating about how we can make these better. And we thought, this is never going to work, right? This distribution model to R&D is going to take us forever, right? It's going to take us forever. But we had that one thought that we can't bring in Wall Street type institutional investors because then they're going to start telling us how to run a foot and ankle company,
Mm-hmm.
right? And no one eats, sleeps, and breathes this market like we do.
Right.
Every waking hour for me is consumed, well, my family and foot and ankle. And
Mm-hmm.
when I sleep, I have a Fitbit now, right? And so it tells me how many hours at night I'm partially awake, how many are in REM sleep. I can tell you most of that is thinking about foot and ankle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm just like I am a little kid in a candy store waking up every morning inspired to do something bigger the next day for foot and ankle. And so all of that got us to reevaluate. And so I'll tell you one of the points that I tell I get to meet a lot of entrepreneurs. And a lot of entrepreneurs are scientists, which is a double whammy because they might not have that sales experience. And I tell them one of those things is, look, you're going to create a strategy that you think in your heart is the right strategy. Be ready to revisit that, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
living process
Mm-hmm.
that you have to be ready to adjust to the things you learn as you're going, because what you see today is very different than what it's going to look like tomorrow.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be public. That
Mm.
was not my goal. I actually wanted the opposite, be private forever. We went public in 2019 or 2021.
Right.
I didn't want an exit. God, I didn't. I dreamt of building a company that maybe my kids could take over.
Mm.
We exited, right? It's just, you have to keep a real nimble view on your strategy and make sure that you revisit constantly. And we have a rule that's called a 15-45 rule, which is take 15 minutes to congratulate yourself, pat yourself on the back for the cool things you've accomplished. Spend 45 minutes thinking about what you have to do better, what you haven't thought about yet, just what you did great that's going to carry forward and what's not going to take you to the next level. And that motto has still survived today. The 15-45 rule is pretty meaningful for us. So I'll
Hmm.
pause there and see if I'm taking this in the right direction
Oh,
for
that's
you.
great. So, you spoke about entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
and there's no question pivoting is a necessity,
Yeah.
and you can't hold too firmly on any strategy because it's the famous statement, "Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth."
Yeah.
I'm sure you took a lot of punches to the mouth. Can you talk
Absolutely.
about some of those bigger moments where you were headed in a certain trajectory and you had to stop,
Yeah.
evaluate, and change course?
Absolutely. So that was one, right? Our philosophy, our thesis on fully bootstrapping a business went out the window in like 6 months. And then I remember, so it's only really a punch in the mouth if you're bullheaded about your theories, right? But if you're open and thinking, being self-aware and saying, I'm going to learn so much as we go, that's okay. No founder has all the answers when they start a business. You're building this as you go, and
Mhm.
and that's healthy. It's a good thing, right? Markets change,
Yeah.
philosophies improve, and just everything gets better, right? And so I I'd like to credit us and say we were always pretty open to those punches, right? They were blessings, not punches for us. But
Mhm.
that was one. We said, okay, this isn't going to work. I took my life savings. Lee took his life savings. We invested in buying kits of Normet. Like we just went there and picked all this stuff, screws and plates and kits, and then we came back and we did everything. It's a point in time that I say like one person did 10 jobs, right? And
Hmm.
and that will come back later, but we did everything. I remember Lee and I, when we got our first office was a rental office, a Regis office. It was an 8-foot office, and we could barely afford a person to answer the phones and help with kits. But on the wall of this 8-foot office was all our inventory in these little bins. Right. And then we moved out from there and we went to the next facility, which was a little bit bigger. Um, but I remember us putting the kitchen in our office and Lee and I grouting the tile and putting up the cabinets and doing the flooring because you can't afford
Mm,
installations. And I remember thinking every dollar that I spend for someone to do this, it's a dollar I can't put into R&D.
mm,
It's a dollar that I can't buy another kit with. And that means something, right? It's
yeah.
not just because you bootstrap it, it's because it's your business. So going back to that, we realized we needed to raise money. How are we going to raise money? And at first, we completely underappreciated how much we were going to need. I remember thinking probably 500,000, 250 to 500,000 would be way more than we need. Yeah. And so we went to Chase Bank and we applied for a small business loan and we got rejected.
Mm,
Right? And the rejection came with some context. It was come back to us when you have a track record. Like at
right.
this point in time, you haven't proven anything. We had just an idea, and it's like, come back when you have a track record. And I thought, you know,
Yeah.
if I had a track record,
I would need
would
you.
I need the money? Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah. It's
I,
classic.
I, I've got to tell you, at that point in time, I just started thinking of all these cliches and things that I've heard. I thought that can't be real, and I was like, it was real. So Lee and I then at that point we said, okay, we don't want institutional investors. We want people who are going to understand this vision of what we're trying to build. And we got rejected from a small business loan. So this is on us, right? And we thought, okay, let's go to friends and family. They get it. They trust, they know our passions and excitements. And if we go to our community, people who understand foot and ankle, then they're going to understand what we're trying to bring to the market. And so that was our approach. Let's avoid institutional investors and let's raise this with friends and family. And my mom happened to be the first investor.
Nice.
Um, Little Portuguese lady, not great English, my father at the time, I want to say he had already passed away. So my mom is saying now, um, it's your inheritance, I trust you, but either way, it's your inheritance. So I'm like, okay, well, she invested the first 50,000 and we got to about 4 friends and family investors. We did a formal raise
Mhm.
and then Lutz Biederman came in from Germany. And I don't know if that name means anything to you, but he was really, really influential in the spine world.
Mhm.
He's from Sillingen, Schwenningen, which is about 26 minutes away from Tübingen.
Yep.
And his origins in spine are like almost the foundation of spine, the Harms cage.
Yep.
He was the engineer working alongside Jorgen Harms
Mhm.
to develop the Harms cage, and his grandfather invented the first prosthetic hand. So just lineage of med
Yeah.
device. And Frank Bono, and I'm mentioning a few things here, but Frank wasn't with Paragon yet. Frank had just left Wright Medical, and he was working with some manufacturing outfits in Indiana. I knew Frank from my days at Wright, and so we started talking to him about doing some manufacturing for some of these prototypes and early concepts. And he found out that we were raising capital, and so he said, "Hey, Lutz just reached out and said he's looking for some investments in trauma." And Frank said he told him, "You might not want trauma. What you really want is foot and ankle." And connected us within a week of that conversation. Lutz was in Miami. We flew to Miami to meet with him there. We gave him the presentation. And I remember walking into that meeting and him saying, if you have an exit strategy, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to be a part of it.
Wow.
And I thought, that's really interesting
That is
because
interesting.
we don't have an exit
Right.
strategy,
Right.
right?
That's wild.
And when we were developing that strategy around investments, we thought, or how are investors going to make money? Right? Everybody needs a return. And so our vision was we're going to be very fiscally conservative. We're going to invest in things, not be stingy that matter, but
Mhm.
we're not going to fake it till you make it. We're not going to have marble floors in our office and we're not going to eat sushi. We love sushi, by the way. And so
Mhm.
we're like, that's too expensive. And we shared VRBO homes and all this stuff. And so the thought was, we'll start distributing a dividend when we can. a conservative dividend. We're not going to take every dollar we make and pass it on. We're going to keep investing in the business, but we're going to set aside something to our loyal shareholders, and that was the idea on how people were going to monetize it. And the dream was, once they get their investment back, the rest of it's the house's money.
Hmm.
And there's going to be zero pressure for us to ever talk about exiting. We're going
Right.
to let's build Arthrex,
Hmm.
$2.5 billion company today. Just what an aspiration. Right. And so when Lutz Peterman came in and said that, we thought, this is too perfect.
He's our guy. Yeah.
Yeah. We were raising at the time. We thought, okay, we probably need 500,000 or 750. We should raise way more than we need to so that we never have to go back and raise more money. We don't want to dilute this friends and family pool, which at the time was still pretty small, but he agreed to allow us to branch out to a couple more friends and family. And so, but he came in and he said, I'll take the whole amount, 4 million, and we thought,
Wow.
this is a dream, and he said, I want the same package that you have and you have, Lee, and you guys are putting in sweat equity and you put in your life savings. And it was beautiful.
Mm,
It couldn't have been better. And he had that German culture around a business where we both dreamt that maybe one day our kids would play
hmm.
a part in this. How cool would that be? And we really want to do more than make money, you know?
Yeah.
And I would say that at that time I was still thinking making money for me is important, right? Like,
Of
how
course.
am I going to
Yeah.
provide for my family and what am
Right.
I going to do for our livelihood? I'll tell you today, that is not even close to the excitement for me. It's just sometimes when you think about how many people are influenced by the decisions you make, and you realize there's over 1,000 people worldwide that provide for their families because of this stuff. It's pretty cool. It's a
Mm,
pinch me moment. That's way more exciting than creating your own personal wealth. So
yeah. No, that's clear. Well, so um, what I'd love for you to do, and I know we're kind of coming up on the end. What kind of you kind of are the Cinderella story for a lot of people. I mean,
mm,
you're a sales rep that built a company from scratch. Obviously,
mm,
it wasn't your sole work, but you had that vision. You took it to the point where it was super successful, had an
mm.
IPO, and ultimately exited for a ridiculous number.
Yeah,
So, what advice? I know there's a lot of I work with a lot of startups, a lot of
yeah.
founders, and and there's a lot of pitfalls, a lot of, peaks and valleys. There's certainly a lot of minefields.
Mm,
What would you say is if you could go back 10, 15 years and give Albert of 2010 or whenever, 2015, whatever that year is that was pivotal,
yeah.
what advice would you have given yourself that you could impart to those who are
Mm,
watching today? And that would extend to the surgeons as well as the sales reps and
yeah.
everybody in between.
God, there's a lot to unpack there. Honestly, just as you're even asking the question, I'm just thinking through years of these experiences. And one thing that I'll tell you, and this is what I tell my kids. Um, I tell my son, be careful. Don't look for what you would love to do, but find what you love in whatever you're doing, right?
Sure.
And that's something that might sound cliche, but is so real. If you love what you're doing, um, every day is a blessing. We sold the company in April. That's not an exit for me. I'm here for the long run. I
Mhm.
still have a lot of work to do, and I'm as thrilled today as I was 6 months ago, waking up every morning about what this journey means. For us, this was an opportunity for us to take it to the next level and to maximize on the good things that we can bring in from Zimmer Biomet, and honestly, even influence Zimmer Biomet from some of the good things we built at Paragon 28. And so one is just uh, if you fake it, it's obvious. It stinks that you don't love what you do, and then every day going to work is work, and then you manage for all the wrong reasons, right? Then you're not um you're not building the culture that you should or could, Right. I remember we brought on he's not a founder, but he was close enough to the beginning that I think of him as a founder. Both Matt Jarbo is a founder, and John Shoemaker came shortly after it. And I remember when John started taking over the sales role, and he was looking at bringing on some salespeople, and we needed to give these people guarantees to get started. And he's like, Albert, what if one of these fails? And I said, John, they're going to fail.
Mhm.
They're going to fail. You have to embrace that, right? If they don't fail, you're not really taking some bold risks here, right? You just hope that the successes outweigh your failures. And he told me years later, like he couldn't believe that he was given that thought, that
Yeah.
ability to just make those decisions. And Matt Jarbo was similar. When Matt Jarbo came on board, I remember him asking me, what do you expect me to do? And I said, I don't want to tell you what I expect you to do. I want you to tell me what you think you're going to do, what you should do, right? Because I guarantee you're going to come up with a much more brilliant strategy than I could. And that was a conversation we had years later. And I think back, I wasn't trying to be cute with those suggestions. They were sincere. I really wanted, I didn't have any arrogance that I knew more than anyone else. I was actually, we have a very flat organization. I have this philosophy, like you can tell me off if you think I'm wrong. I just kind of ask that you're be right. If you tell me
Right.
and you're going to say that in front of people. But so anyways, we need to, if I can encourage entrepreneurs to take a very humble approach to building a business and just realize that the people that you surround yourselves with along the journey, they're not always going to be the right fit, but those are the people that make the journey what the journey is. And allowing them to construct the vision with you is so much cooler than thinking you have all the answers, right? The minute I get the chairman, CEO, and co-founder on my title, it's like, oh, I should know everything. No, you shouldn't know everything. We're humans, you know?
Yeah.
When I talk to CEOs now, we're bouncing ideas off from like, hey, how did you think about this? And you realize everyone's got some insecurities, you know.
Sure.
Let the people create the culture and create the vision, and it's pretty rewarding. The other part of that is just being nimble. You have to shuck and jive as things are in front of you, and you have to do it with the best intentions in mind. And then one more thing I'll tell you on that is I was invited to speak after we went public, and the idea to go public was solely to be able to infuse enough capital to invest in enabling technologies. That was the one time that we realized we're going to need resources we don't have in house, right? And we thought, okay, to raise $50 million from moms and pops and aunts and uncles is going to be impossible.
Mhm.
So that's where we thought, okay, maybe going public makes sense. And I was invited to speak on a podium for entrepreneurs thinking about going public about 6 months into that. And I remember when we were going public and we're doing the roadshow and we're meeting all these investors and we're telling the story and giving them the vision, we were EBITDA positive from 2015. Right. One more thing that I'll tell you there is um, I'm really proud of that. We went, we became EBITDA positive in 2015 on a $5.5 million run rate, sales
Yeah.
run rate. It was actually 5.7 that year that we did. And we talk about like we crossed over into EBITDA positivity in April of that year. And I remember Frank Bono saying, who now is our CTO and one of our founders, but then he was saying, we bought a pizza and we went back into negative, you know? So it's,
Mhm. Mhm.
but the fact that we went EBITDA positive, we got to 109 million, 107 million or something in sales in 2019 on 15 million of capital. Right. And that was really game changing for us because the minute you go EBITDA positive, you might not start having cash in the bank account growing, but you stop hemorrhaging
Right.
investment dollars, right? That
Mhm.
means you're balancing those investments with money coming in and you're living responsibly. but we were never cheap with growth opportunities. And so I was really, really proud of that. But I remember when we were going public and we're doing the road show and people were criticizing us for being profitable.
Mm.
And at that point in time, it was like right on the tail end of a really hot capital market, right? And so investors were like, "Are you investing enough in growing? Like you're growing 45% over the last 5-year CAGR, but could you be growing 70 if you invested more?"
Right.
Just like spend, spend, spend kind of
Yep.
mentality. And I
Yeah.
thought, these people don't care about
Mhm.
solid business foundation and values, right? And then 6 months after we went public, the market turned.
Mm.
And all of a sudden inflation and rates started going up and getting access to capital got really tough. And
Mhm.
overnight, investors turn on you and say, "When are you going to be profitable? When are you
That's
going to be
right.
profitable?" And so when I was invited to speak at the New York Stock Exchange on this panel, they asked me, "What advice would you give?" And I said, if you're not ready to, with conviction, to not run your business quarter to quarter,
Mm.
don't go public. And we were not. I wanted our stock to do well, but I'm looking at 5 and 10 year horizons. That's how I know to run a business. Short term strategies never work to build a good, solid business. You
True.
compromise all the things that you know in your heart matter, and I wasn't going to let that distraction happen. You are running this for the next 5 years, and I think Bezos said it beautifully. It was either Bezos or Elon Musk. I think it was Bezos said, "The things your stock price today is the things you did 2 years ago."
Mhm.
All right. There's nothing you could do today to influence Q3 or Q4. It's like, it's just,
Right. Right.
that's not the, and that means a lot. And so that's my next advice is one, spend every dollar like it's your own. It is your own. And this raise when you don't need it, that philosophy can get you in trouble. Fake it till you make it stinks. All right. And this is an area where Lee and I had some disagreements. Lee came from Stryker. He was used to these big marble floored type buildings. And I remember him thinking, if a surgeon comes to visit our headquarters and they see carpet, they're going to be disappointed in us. I said, "Lee, no, they want to appreciate the humility of a startup. They don't
Yeah.
expect you to have marble floors. Yeah.
Sure.
Um, and so that's something I would caution people is don't get caught up in the appearances of things
Yeah.
and embrace the chapter, right? You're a startup, beautiful. We started this in a basement in Lee's, you know, basement in Birmingham, Alabama.
Mhm.
Um, Embrace that,
Yeah.
and so that's another piece of advice. Live within your means and then be really careful because you start off a business with one person doing 10 jobs. And then when you get a little breath of fresh air, when you start seeing some success in the business, you flip the switch and you go, "Oh, thank God, I don't have to clean toilets anymore."
Right.
And it quickly converts the culture to 10 people doing one job.
Mm.
And that inefficiency will bankrupt you.
Yeah.
All right. And it happens like that.
Yeah, it
It
goes
happens
quick.
really quick. And so make sure that you really focus where those dollars are going and every dollar matters. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to sort of wrap up our conversation
Yeah.
today.
Absolutely.
I'm super grateful. So one of the things that you said, and I think it really resonated, and certainly when you talk about humility in leadership, I mean, it was Colin's book that was one of the hallmarks of a great CEO was humility.
Mm,
And, so I think it's interesting to hear you say that. I think you do embody that, and maybe it's from your roots as a sales rep. It just
mm.
you still see yourself as kind of a sales rep, and,
Yeah.
there's something special about that perspective. So,
Yeah.
thank you so much for
Of course.
your time today, for sharing your story,
Yeah.
and, I'm just grateful, to have gotten to have this chance to hear from you today.
Thank you so much, Drew. I appreciate it.